Welcome to this very special episode of the Great Debaters Contest. I am Mariam Bishar, and at the inter-regional level, we expect surprises. So in a unique twist today, we have Precious Blood High School facing off with the audience because their opponents were not able to make it to this debate. Their motion is on whether developing countries should not have to bear as big a brunt in combating climate change as developed countries.
The motion this week is: developing countries should not have to bear as big a brunt in combating climate change as developed countries. Proposing the motion, Precious Blood Secondary School Rerouter. Opposing the motion, the audience. Each contestant has 3 minutes to make their submissions. The audience also gets a chance to put their questions to each team. Each side will have an additional 1 minute to make a final statement. The judge's decision is final. The winning school will get an ICT chill-out zone with the widescreen TV, computers, webcams, and internet connection. The teacher from the winning school gets 100,000 shillings courtesy of Chase Bank. The winning students each get a tablet courtesy of Safaricom, a gift hamper from Unilever, and a gift hamper from mimi.co.ke. And together they all win the title, The Great Debaters. May the best school win.
Proposer number 1, you may begin. You have 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to bring to your attention what climate change is. Climate change is a long-time change in the weather patterns of the Earth. This is usually due to an increase in the Earth's atmospheric temperatures. The criteria for deciding whether a nation is developed or not, it is based on its economic and its industrial advancements, as well as infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, Magdalene Kavu, Precious Blood Rerouter. I stand before you with the strongest conviction that this motion is in fact correct. Ladies and gentlemen, judging from the statistics that we have, developed nations do in fact emit higher levels of carbon, as well as other toxic wastes, which are in fact responsible for the climatic changes that we are facing. Take, for example, in the United States. On average, an individual is said to emit about 17.9 tons of carbon. Are you shocked? Well, in China, it is 5.3 tons of carbon. I know you're wondering why I choose to narrow down to carbon. This is because 65% of the climate change experienced on our planet is in fact attributed to the combustion of fossil fuels. Apart from that, I would like to move on and say that the impact of the reduction of emissions of carbon as well as other toxic wastes from developed nations would have a greater impact as opposed to a reduction in the emissions of toxic wastes by developing nations. Look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Joanne Ruddock, the former cabinet minister in the UK of Energy and Climate, she said, from a report compiled by her ministry, that individual reduction of emissions in the UK alone would lead to a total reduction of 40% in the emissions contributed by the nation as a whole. Whereas statistics show that developing nations already have people living low carbon lives. I mean, surely, do you expect that with a majority of a country's population in the rural areas, that everyone is driving a car, that they are all responsible for the amounts of carbon emissions in the atmosphere? I do not think so. Moving on, in the words of the wise Mahatma Gandhi, he once said that it is wrong and immoral to escape the consequences of our actions. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot move this responsibility to developing nations, yet we know that developed nations are the ones that are greatly responsible, which have the greater responsibility. It is their challenge. True, they will lead, we will follow. Moving on. It is to be noted that the carbon emissions, as well as the emissions of sulfur dioxide and other effluents, are directly proportional to the economic output of a nation. Who in this audience wants to claim ignorance and tell me that they do not know that developed nations are in fact the countries with the greatest outputs? None of you, as I can see. I would like to leave you with a quote from Otto von Bismarck. Anyone who has ever looked into the glazed eyes of a soldier dying on the battlefield will think hard before starting war. This is not a blame game. It is a question of responsibility. It is a question of responsibility to the human race. I would like you to think about our obligations. There are obligations to ourselves and to our planet. Thank you.
Given what the first proposer has said, anything that opposes her view?
My name is Lulu from the Kenya High School, and I have a point on the opposing side. I don't think that the developed countries should be given the responsibility of combating climate change because they are using forms of energy that are not directly linked to affect the climate. For example, the developed countries are using mostly geothermal power and solar to power their industries, including wind, while the developing countries are still stuck to hydroelectric power. I strongly feel that these countries that are using the natural resources should actually top their game and stop so that they can save the climate. Thank you.
I'm Zipporah Gaku from Starehe Girls, and I think that why are we playing the blame game here? Of all the climatic effects that we have, Africa happens to be affected the most. So by us claiming that the developing states should not take up the responsibility, I think that we should just stop the blame game and just take up the initiative because we are the ones who are getting most affected by these effects. And so we should take up the challenge. The developing nations, as per now, they are not having all the drought and the diverse weather conditions, the floods and everything. Don't you think that we should be the ones to have that initiative because we are the ones who are being affected?
Dan Wafula from the Goreti High School. And the proposals you've talked about, the developed countries having a lot of vehicles on the road that they emit a lot of smoke which affects the ozone layer. I beg to differ by saying that in the African nations, or in the developing nation, we are affected by mostly the smoke from vehicles. Why? Because we have very many unroadworthy vehicles, unlike in the developed nations.
You can now give a rebuttal to what they've said.
Zasu Matali from Precious Blood High School, Riruta. To the first speaker, you said that this is a blame game. Well, let me correct you. The first speaker said that this is not a blame game. It's a question of responsibility. So please, kindly, next time, please pay attention. To the other speaker, you said that developing nations should take this up. Let me ask you, how can you stitch a hole when you lack thread? These developing countries do not have the funds to combat this climate change. So we cannot give them the responsibility to do this when they have more pressing issues other than climate change. Climate change is the least of their worries as we speak. They're facing civil wars, they're facing political instabilities. So why should we tell them to combat climate change when other things are bugging them more than this? If developing nations want to develop, then I believe that they should first sort out the more pressing issues and not think about something that affects the whole world, and developed nations are at a more comfortable position to combat it. The UN has the Kyoto Protocol, which obliges all developed nations to step in to combat climate change. Have you asked yourself, why hasn't the Kyoto Protocol obliged the developing nations? Let me give you the answer. Developing nations cannot do this. It's a fact that we all have to face. We might try to oppose this just because we are one of them, but it's a fact. Developing nations don't have the capability to do this. Hence, the Kyoto Protocol has made a pact with each of the developed nations. Well, the Bible says, thou shalt carry thy own cross. Developed nations have a cross to carry. Historically, they're the ones which began this. As Faulkner once told us, the past never dies, the past is never buried, the past lives with us. In the past, the developed nations began the First and the Second World Wars. And during these wars, they set up nuclear bombs in many towns. And these nuclear bombs caused massive destruction of the ozone layer. Have you asked yourself, this effect is still being felt to date. We have people in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, being born deformed. Let me ask you, do we still want this to go on? You did not cause this. We as developing nations did not cause this. The developed nations are the ones which sent these nuclear bombs. So let them carry their own cross. I mean, you wouldn't want to be blamed for something that you didn't do. So you cannot tell us that developing nations should step in. I believe this is an obligation for the developed nations. One person once told me a story about a boy named Smith. Smith is a 7-year-old boy. He was admitted at the tender age of 5 years. He almost died, and he's been in a coma for 2 years. And doctors have tried to solve this, but they found such a high level of carbon dioxide inside. So I ask you a question, should we let Smith die or should we save him? It's an obligation for the developed countries. Let us all support this. Thank you.
Questions for the ladies?
I'm Vicky Wangeshi, Sarai Girls Center. And my first question is, you said you should focus on more pressing issues. Isn't drought in Africa one of the pressing issues? The next one, do you want the developed nations to take up these responsibilities so that they can face their own selfish interests, such that Africa as a nation, which should be facing this climatic change as one of their problems, will be left in hunger-stricken situation, such that these developed nations will come back to us, then they donate food to us, and later we shall be indebted to them.
I'm Joseph Nzao from Olympic High School. To my opinion, I think both developed countries and developing countries are both polluting the environment, that is, in the emissions of carbon. So, by asking developed nations to take the responsibility of actually taking care of this, what about the African nations that are actually polluting the environment? What about them? Shouldn't they take the responsibility?
The third proposer, you can respond.
Angela Shule, Precious Blood Rerouter. In reference to the first question, you told me that drought is one of the problems that face developing nations. I shall respond to your question as a point. You have indeed helped me. Am I, as a developing nation, supposed to combat climate change, or am I supposed to find ways to solve this drought? Am I supposed to find money for food aid, or am I supposed to fix a hole in the ozone that I did not drill? In reference to your same second question, you asked me whether, why developed nations will solve these problems with selfish interest. If they do indeed solve this problem with their selfish interest, are they solving a different ozone layer, or is it the same ozone layer all around the Earth? If they solve this problem selfishly, they will indeed affect themselves while affecting African countries. And I do not think that they will do this. Furthermore, to the gentleman who asked if both developing and developed countries cause the climate change, why shouldn't they combat it equally? This is because I believe if you create a bigger mess, you have a bigger obligation to fix it. So, as we all know, developed countries have created the bigger mess in the ozone layer, and they have caused bigger climate change. So why should developing countries be made to combat things that they did not cause? Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring to your attention that leaking in nuclear plants in developed countries is one of the leading causes of climatic change today. These nuclear plants are found in Japan, in the USA, and in France, among other countries. For one nuclear plant, the emission is equal to the emission for 4 developing countries. Surely, how do we expect 4 developing nations to stitch a hole that they did not cause? How? Furthermore, we all know industrialization in developing nations started in the 16th century. We are currently in the 21st century. This gives developed nations 500 years of stuffing the ozone with carbon emissions and other harmful emissions, while developing nations have been industrialized for about 50 or 100 years at most. So how can we expect the emissions of 500 years and for 100 years to be equal? This is preposterous. Furthermore, developed countries have a more economic-based they are more economically vested in developing countries, so they should take part in solving the problems because they depend on these developing countries for their sustainment. Thank you for your time.
We'll now have a member of the proposing team to wrap up, give us their final thoughts.
My dear friends, did you know that by 2020, all the ice caps on Mount Kilimanjaro will have melted? Now I pose this question to you. Why do we still look forward to a Vision 2030? See what I see, feel what I feel, and hear what I hear. And I hear a ticking time bomb. And in any minute now, it's going to explode. Now, the time at hand will determine whether 2030 will be our gateway to prosperity or whether it will be our 10th memorial service. What do we want to happen? Do we want us to die? We need to call upon someone to solve this, and the best person at hand are the developed nations. So I call upon all of you, I invite all of you to support us in this motion, because developed countries clearly have the greater obligation, as we explained. Thank you.
I'll start with Kavu. You raised pertinent issues for your team quite passionately. I'll only advise on a way of registering an impact in the course of a debate. You know, you speak significantly fast, or relatively fast, let me say that. So you need some time to register impact. And maybe lastly, a word of advice possibly is limit movement. Sometimes you can tone down a little on the movement. I know sometimes you could be responding to the movement of your words, to the rhythm of the words, but you can tone it just a little. Nonetheless, a good first speaker. Maleli, I like you the most. I like your eloquence, your lyric flair. You get my attention 100% without any problem. I just listen to you all the time when you're debating, no doubt to that. Also, you know how to choose the best vehicle for your words. By that I mean that you have, I could pick a number of analogies from your debate. You're a good debater from comparing the three that are seated there. Finally, Angela, I hail your passion. Nonetheless, did you mean preposterous or the other word? I bet you meant preposterous. Yeah, that is what you meant, not the other pronunciation. Nonetheless, you're a fairly good speaker. What you can do, you could also master your courage. I believe that at some point, you are a bit shaky. So if you master your courage, you can make a good debater. Nonetheless, to the three girls, you're fairly good debaters.
Precious Blood, Magdalene, I think you're good. You managed to give us your pointers as a first speaker. Just minimize on movements. And even though it's good to have pointers on the small cards or papers that you have, show us that you've mastered the topic at some point and don't read too much. Zansu, you are very strong, wonderful debater, articulate, and I think you did well as a cross-examiner. I think we also toast you a lot with pause, weight, and all, but you still managed to come and compose yourself and still do a very good job. Congratulations for that. Angela Chalet, you did well as well. You know where to stress your words, and you put emphasis on some very good words that were very good pointers to your motion. However, just work on a little bit of your confidence. It felt as if the stage was a little bit intimidating. Just work on that, and the sky will be your limit. All the best, Precious Blood.
One of the things that I wanted to hear is, even when developed countries haven't contributed negatively to the depletion of the environment or the ozone layer, that they could actually participate in combating climate change as part of their social responsibility, because they already have the financial muscle, they have infrastructure, and they can be able to contribute to a greater environment and a better climate as part of their social responsibility. But having said that, I think you executed it very well. One of the things that I loved was the teamwork demonstrated. I think even in terms of your style and of presentation, your mastery of language, your passion and conviction, we see that coming all the way from Kavu, to Mateli, and of course to Cholet. All the best to Precious Blood.
The lovely ladies who are able to face off against a very tough audience scored 72% from the judges. It's a very good score, and we hope it's high enough to get them to the next round. But for this episode of the Great Debaters Contest, we thank them for the good job and you at home for watching, and of course the studio audience. We'll see you next time. I am Mariam Bishar.
The following is the list of schools that have made it from the inter-regionals to the nationals. The winning school will get an ICT chill-out zone with a widescreen TV, computers, webcams, and internet connection. The teacher from the winning school gets 100,000 shillings courtesy of Chase Bank. The winning students each get a tablet courtesy of Safaricom, a gift hamper from Unilever, and a gift hamper from mimi.co.ke. And together, they all win the title, The Great Debaters. May the best school win.